Okay, hi everyone. I'd like to welcome Peter Driscoll to our first Entellers podcast. Peter came onto my radar at the beginning of this year, and I was immediately impressed by his energy, drive, and ultimately his organisation. The really interesting thing about Peter is that ultimately he was successful in securing a position with JP Morgan, and I thought it would be really worthwhile for me to share Pete's story with you all. Hopefully to help inspire you, to motivate you, but ultimately demonstrate that if you approach the process of searching for a new career in the right way, you can ultimately be incredibly successful. A really brief overview of Peter. Having left school at 16, he joined the Royal Navy and served there for 11 years. After deploying in some really interesting places across the world, after much debate, he decided to make the leap into the commercial sector, and in March 2020 secured himself a role with JP Morgan, where he is the team leader in the EMEA Global Security Operations Center. I know Peter kind of really hopes this inspires you and that you walk away with some real action points to help you with changing your career and changing your own life. So look, I'm gonna pass over to Peter. Peter, I mean, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it, and I'm
That's
sure
right.
great points for the guys. I guess first of all, why did you want to leave the military? You know, why do you want to leave the military, and why security?
So I feel that having served for 11 years, as you said there, and traveled the world and did what I felt that I wanted to do, I felt it was time for a change and time to climb a new ladder. And then security just came hand in hand with what I'd done in my military career, having been in electronic warfare and intelligence. So I felt that it was an industry that best suited my skill set and where I felt that I'd develop and also bring something to a team.
Did you know anything about the security world? Because obviously, people from your background, that's kind of the obvious. People defer to, oh, I'm gonna enter the corporate security world. But did you know anything about it? Why did you choose security as a career?
Yeah, quite frankly, at the start of my transition, I thought I knew about it, but very quickly I realized that I didn't know anything about the industry. I knew the industry existed, but had no real concept of all the different branches and physical security, cyber security, crisis management, all the different branches. But I felt this was like very similar to other service leaver I'd met, no matter what industry they were going into, is that you feel that you know an industry, but when you start developing that knowledge and networking, that's where you really learn about the industry as such.
No, absolutely, that's great, brilliant. So you made that decision. Okay, I'm gonna cross over. I'm gonna do something different. How did you begin your search? What was your starting point?
Yeah, I was very lucky that my last posting in the military allowed me to work with NGOs, attend different think tanks, and also go to forums where security and intelligence companies were presenting. So often what I would do, I'd go onto their website and just get an understanding of what they did, how they did it. And that was it really. And then I moved on to LinkedIn.
Brilliant. And that's quite a nice kind of segue really. In terms of, you were really proactive, right, in reaching out. I mean, I spoke to you at the beginning of the year. I know you spoke to Chris here, and people really knew who you were, which I think was incredible. What did you target companies proactively? I mean, what do you consider real networking? You know, what people talk about networking, don't they? And it's going to a conference sometimes and, awkwardly shuffling around or standing in the corner and not really talking to anyone. What do you consider real networking, and how did you go about building those networks out? Was it company by company, person by person?
As you just said there, I think everyone has a different perception of what networking is. Someone might think that networking is sending a connection to someone on LinkedIn, and then that's it, you're connected, so you've therefore networked. But to me, real networking is building and maintaining a relationship with someone in the industry that you're aiming for, realistically. And I often say to people I'm mentoring, it's no good adding someone on LinkedIn and not building a relationship. Otherwise, you may as well add your local baker on LinkedIn instead. That was my kind of approach to it. And I think what I was doing was I was going through LinkedIn and I was typing the industries, or sorry, the companies I was looking to potentially join. I knew they had in-house security and intelligence, and I would type that company followed by the word security or intelligence, and then go into the people category and find them through that. And then I'd connect and, just get my point across of who I was, what I was trying to achieve. And I'd say I had a very, very positive outcome from it, in the sense that people were very receptive and came back to me. And it's all about building that relationship and maintaining it. I think maintaining is the crucial part.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I've been guilty myself. You send a LinkedIn connection and that's it. It's a bit like the easy apply button on LinkedIn. I've kind of talked about this / ranted about this for a long time. And I think you can begin to market, or you can market yourself, or you can kind of start these conversations, but you have to follow them up. You have to follow them through. And I think the easy apply button is the enemy as well. I think people push that button and go, hey, look, I've done my job, and it's not me, it's them. I've talked about it before. So without that second stage follow up, people are great in security. There cannot be many professions where people are so receptive and so giving with their time. Even at the most senior levels, there are some fantastic people out there. So yeah, I support that and I endorse that. And I think it's really important that you take it to the next level. So fantastic. I'm really interested in your JP Morgan story, because it ties back into my my kind of, I guess, kind of distaste for just applying for things blindly on organizations' websites and thinking that's it. We can all apply for 20 jobs a day and send the same CV. Don't spend time to really build out an application, and then think we've done our job when we haven't. And I think your example of how you became, how you joined JP Morgan, for me is fantastic, and is evidence of that. So could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to the previous point of, if you use LinkedIn to your benefit, it can be a very powerful tool in your job search. I'd spend, as I mentioned earlier, I used to spend hours researching companies that have intelligence security functions, and connect people with that company. I saw the role come up for JP Morgan, and I subsequently applied for it. Now, what I'd done previously with everybody else I'd connected with, I'd try and go for a coffee, or at least have a call. I ended up going, for unbeknown to me, for a coffee with my future hiring manager. And this proved, pivotal, because I went for a coffee and just talked about my background and what I'd done, having researched a little bit the job spec and tying it in with my CV. But I just went in there and just told him who I was, and that's where my hiring manager saw something in me that he liked, and very quickly after that I got invited for an interview. Now, had I not gone for the coffee, would I potentially be here? It's unknown. But yeah, I think building that face-to-face relationship, and not just being a piece of paper on a screen, definitely helps. And I think getting out there and meeting someone for a coffee can definitely put you ahead of others in certain ways.
Definitely. I think soft skills are so important now, because you have to differentiate yourself in some way. Be that on LinkedIn, be that with your CV. You must, everything must be bespoke. Everything must be followed up. You have to have a process whenever you apply for a role. And I think, again, if you can get in front of people will often see those. People can teach them the skills that surround physical security. And I think I've sat with senior security leaders who have said as much. They're looking for leadership qualities. They're looking for people that they can see as growing within the business. And I think you have to be curious. You have to, that curiosity that you have outside of JP Morgan, that curiosity to find more about the profession, to find out more about who does what, who has that big intelligence function, who has that security function. That curiosity is what organizations will really like, and I think ultimately why they brought you in, because they can see you growing from within the business. Yeah. In terms of, I mean, that takes me into takes us to an interesting point. I think I still stand by, this business is really different to how it was. I think traditionally we've had people that would have a full career in perhaps the police and military, maybe do 30 years and have maybe a 10-year corporate career. And those individuals maybe would have one or two jobs historically, and so the career path was very, very different. What we've seen now is a real shift. People leaving the police, people leaving the military, people leaving just the public sector in after 10 years, sometimes less. And I think people have always been up until this point quite apologetic. Oh gosh, I've only done 15 years in one place, and it's kind of crazy when you think about it like that. So I think this business needs to adapt, the profession needs to adapt. It has to support careers now that are 25 years rather than 10 years. With that in mind, what do you see as the future, I guess, in the security profession for you, but also for your generation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think it's something that not a lot of people think about because they think about very much the now and the what's happening next month. But I very much I see myself on the long run. I do plan to be a chief security officer, but I know there's many steps and experience needed before that. So I'm just looking to understand the industry a bit more and take it back step by step. But I think for my generation and the guys and girls leaving the military and the police and the public sector and trying to come into the intelligence security industry, is that, especially at the moment with COVID going on, I've seen that the door is still turning for the security intelligence industry. There's always a need for intelligence and security, no matter what's going on in the world. That's number one. Two, the cyberspace is growing and it's getting bigger. Every month, every year, the threats are becoming more dynamic and diverse. So yeah, I actually think it's a really exciting time for the industry, for people that are leaving now and joining now. Sorry. I think getting in now, and not just only in the security industry and intelligence industry, but generally, I'd say people leaving the military into any industry. I think it's a very exciting time to get across. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think what we're trying to leave people with here are some takeaways. I think that, and there's some real kind of gold dust in there. They're fantastic. So in terms of, I guess, your four tips to success, whenever we've spoken before, you've always been, and we can talk about this if this isn't one of your tips to success, but I've always been really impressed with how you've put yourself out there and allowed people to ask you questions, but you've always been really quite kind of firm in retort. I think that's really important, to be honest with people and say, no, that's not what to expect, or yes, that you're on the right pathway. So, what are your 4 tips to success?
I'd say I've often been known as persistent, but then I knew that very quickly I had to be persistent, because I understand people are very busy in their normal lives and they're going out their way to help you, but sometimes work will overcome them and they may forget. So you have to be persistent and chase after them. I used to come off a call, for example, let's say with you, and in my calendar straight away I'd put in James Butler, 2 weeks time, send a message, say hello, just show your face again, remind him that you're waiting for his response on his email or the feedback on your CV. I think the second one is resilience. You will face failure, whether it be an interview or assessments. It happened to me a few times where I was turned away and I felt really down about it. This is where I learned to get myself ahead of the rest by networking and showcasing my skills that I wanted it most, ultimately. And I think a big one, which I definitely learned myself, was knowing your CV and knowing the job spec. Knowing your CV and associating it to a job spec is one of the most important things when in a hiring process, because it's all well and good you knowing your CV and knowing something about the job spec, but the point being is that you have to combine them together. So when you tell your experience, you tell it so that it reflects the job spec, which I don't feel a lot of people do. And that's something that I did, and I learned from, because many times I didn't do that. And then interviews and video interviews. I mean, I had some disasters. I'll be frank, but ultimately, in the end, I came out and I learned from them. And the video interviews, they're funny old beasts. They take some getting used to, because you're sat there looking at your screen, just looking at yourself, answering a question whilst it's being timed. So I'd recommend doing some practice runs if you can, but also, apply for jobs. And I'm not saying apply for jobs you don't want, but apply for certain jobs so you get that practice, you get that technique right. So when your ultimate job that you really want comes up, you're well versed in the video interview stage. And then in regards to the physical interviews, this is where the relationship building and management and going for coffees comes in. Because I'm quite a nervous person, believe it or not, when it comes to interviews. But when I met my hiring manager for the JP Morgan role, it's one of the times I actually felt the least nervous of all times I've done an interview, because I'd met him previously for a coffee. So I knew what he was like. I knew that I kind of got on with him. So I was myself. I was a lot more myself. And then I think one of the final points, I know you said 4, but is back to the persistent point, is when you're asking someone for help on LinkedIn, whether it be LinkedIn or in person, don't expect them to ring you. Don't, they're going out their way to help you. Don't give your number to them for them to ring you, because ultimately they're the ones who are trying to help. You go out your way to ring them. I've seen it quite a few times where people have put a comment up on LinkedIn, for example. People have commented to try and help, and that person's just not even bothered to reply or like their messages. They're little things, but the point being is that someone's gone out their way to try and help you. And you just need to show face, and it's very much a play the game mindset. People are there to, as you said before, it's been an industry that I found that everyone is so helpful, the majority, and they will, in some way or another, it might not be as helpful as the last person, but they'll try and help you.